Well, the major driver for these widespread bushfires this season has been the crippling drought, has been massive fuel loads, probably fuel loads that have been building for decades, the astonishing number of arsonists at work as well, and probably increased temperatures from climate change, but that's hard to measure, as I pointed out earlier on this week. Whatever a review or even a Royal Commission into these fires recommends, it will see Australia get rid of the kid gloves when it comes to clearing fuel loads in national parks. That's guaranteed. But what if we could not only clear those dangerous conditions, but do so without much burning, and in turn create a myriad of new and vital manufacturing opportunities? Well, volunteer firefighter Ross Hampton, who also happens to head the Australian Forest Products Association, says it can and must be done. He joins us from our Parliament House studio in Canberra. Ross, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Ross, what is the predominant comment you're hearing from firefighters as they emerge from some of these fire fronts?
I want to come to that, Chris, but just like you did at the head of the show, it would be remiss of me really not to make a call out to all those people in orange who are running towards the flames in Victoria tonight, and indeed Tumbarumba and other places, WA. As you said, people are being advised to run away. All the volunteer firefighters are running towards the flames. And here's the other thing too, the other heroes are wearing high vis and they're running towards the flame as well. They're all the forestry workers with all their heavy machinery that are clearing roads and fire breaks. The same people, by the way, that Premier Andrews has said we shouldn't have in the bush anymore. We want to close all that down.
Yeah, real frontline stuff, dangerous frontline stuff, isn't it?
Dangerous frontline stuff, and these people, this is part of my argument, I guess, that I'm making, is that if we take all these people and machines out of the bush and out of the forestry areas, why do we think the situation's going to get any better in future summers? It's just not going to. So what people are saying, what firefighters say mostly about our approach to any fire situation is what's the fuel load ahead of us looking like? Is this a grass fire or is this a forest fire? You know, and just how intense is the forest fire? Is there a situation where we shouldn't even be going down a road, for example, because the undergrowth around us is going to be so inflammable and there's not enough room to turn around? And so that's the point I've been making in the last few days, Chris, is we are facing a huge tragedy with this fire. Let's not go past that loss of life and loss of livelihoods and property. This is a terrible thing, but the ongoing tragedy would be if we don't actually use this opportunity to seriously rethink the way we manage our whole landscape.
OK, the fuel loads that are present currently in national parks that haven't been burnt, they're fuel loads that have been basically grown over decades, haven't they?
This is what happens, yeah, and in fact there's lots of scientists who can show you a pattern of mega fires as fuel loads re-emerge in these enormous areas of bush over several decades. What I think people really don't have a sense of the scale of the Australian bush. We visit it a little bit, we go to national parks, we go holidaying there a bit. It's an enormous estate. It's 132 million hectares. And you know, the forestry area, the multi-use forest where some of us go camping or shooting or forward driving, and we use for a little bit of forestry, that's only 5.5 million hectares of that 132 million. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of bush out there that we in the past up to this point haven't really been taking an aggressive management approach to. We haven't got enough roads, we haven't got enough infrastructure, we haven't got enough firefighting, we're not doing enough burning, but we've talked about that a lot in the last few weeks, winter burning. But what we're hardly doing at all in Australia is what they do in the States, for example, is get in with machinery and remove a lot of material from strategic areas from around towns, communities, roads, watercourses, substations, that sort of thing.
And when you do that, you don't have to rely on very special weather days like you do when you reduce hazards. You don't have to rely on, you know, the fact that it's not windy or that it's too cold or too wet or too hot.
That's exactly right. We've heard that, I'm sure all of us have heard that on radio in the places where we live, where there was supposed to be a winter burn and it was called off because you know, the weather wasn't quite right, or there was a community expectation that it wasn't the appropriate time for it. And that's why we're doing... It's not a panacea. No one should mishear that winter burns are the silver bullet for everything. They're not. Everyone acknowledges that, but they're very much an important part of the toolkit. We're doing 30% less now than we were doing 20 or 30 years ago when we got 3 times as many fires. climate change may be playing a role, as you say, but we think that these two things are connected. Indeed, the Royal Commission in Victoria, after that really terrible Black Saturday event, certainly said the same thing.
Yeah, OK, so you want to take, firstly, the responsibility of deciding whether permits can be offered to reduce hazards or even use heavy machinery to clear fire trails and fire breaks. You want those decision-making processes to get out of the hands of conservation groups, don't you?
Well, essentially, I think we need a process where those groups certainly have an input into that, but they're not the final arbiters, and they're certainly not swinging the pendulum completely that way. That's why we're calling for the Royal Commission, a national Royal Commission with a real focus on our overall land management in Australia. I mean, it's just appalling when we see this sort of thing while our people are on the front line at the fires, you know, facing potentially life-threatening situations from green groups saying, yes, in all this horrific loss, some really good news. The Eden chip mill is burning down.
Outrageous.
I mean, what I think people have to understand is that the forestry industries are the backbone of many regional communities in Australia. There's 80,000 people work in forestry. Tourism is a very important part of those places, but it usually is summer tourism, not winter, whereas forestry jobs are all year. And now, in these places that have been particularly hard hit, and I know the federal government's very alive to this, as are the state governments, we're going to need jobs in those places, ongoing good jobs for the locals. So something like that wood chip mill in Eden, for example, is absolutely vital part of the rural economy, rural infrastructure. 300 jobs rely on that.
OK, let's cut to the chase. Could we bring logging back virtually to national parks in a way that maybe we witnessed when we were children, when logging existed in a much wider form, and we also took our firewood from the floor of national parks and state recreation areas, and we didn't treat trees like people? Could we do more of that, and could we at the same time make it pay its way by not only protecting the environment in times of summer bushfires, but also create manufacturing opportunities?
We don't know is the honest answer whether that would be an appropriate level of forestry management around the edges of national parks or along the roads that would be created. We'd have to have the proper inquiry to understand that. But what we do know, Chris, and I think this is what you're touching on at the head of the show, is that it doesn't work to do... The reason the burns work, winter burns, is because it removes the fuel load. If you just go into a forest and thin it out or clear out the sub-level growth and the ladder fuels and leave it on the ground, all you're doing is creating kindling for the next fire. Yep. It has to come out. So if it comes out, what do you use it for? How do you make it? You can't leave it on the side of the road.
What could we use it for?
Worse. Well, you can use all the small stuff for fuels, for example, pellets. There's a lot of climate change targets, for example, around the world in Europe and in Japan and Korea. Means that they're using a lot of pelletised timber to mean they're not using as many fossil fuels. That's just one use, for example. But the world's moving ever increasingly towards using timber or fibre-based products instead of plastics, oil-based products. You know, everything you get and we produce from petroleum, you can produce from trees, from fibre of some sort. So it doesn't matter then if it's just chipped up small material or rubbishy material that's been dragged out. It can be turned into anything from bioplastics to biochemicals to biofuels, pharmaceuticals, everything, aeroplane parts, cars. They're doing it now, all car parts I should say. They're all around the world creating this whole new line of materials. So Australia's really not doing much of that at all yet because we don't have that material. So we actually think there's potentially a way to have a win-win-win situation here, a win for the economy, a win for the environment, for those national parks, and also a win in terms of fire mitigation and fire management.
And giving people jobs, which we've got to keep doing because of our growing population.
That's a fourth win, that's right, the economic continuation of those great regional jobs and the economies, especially in those rural and regional towns where if you took out the forest industries, for example, you really would probably hollow out the town and who knows how long it would last.
There'll be some impetus towards taking a whole new approach to national parks and what we do with land management. I guess you've got to try and get senior government ministers and even the Prime Minister on side with this. The conservation movement fight very dirty, though, Ross.
Well, I think something's changed, Chris, in Australia. I mean, it really has. We've been mounting these sort of arguments, I must say, for quite a number of years now. But it's this season has been so fundamental for so many people. So many people have been directly impacted by either the fires themselves directly or the smoke or being evacuated from various places. It is a really and a huge opportunity, if I can put it that way, for us to have a proper serious think about this. I mean, I've got to be a bit careful, both you and I should be careful that we don't downplay the fact that we're only halfway through the season, the fire season, and there are big fires forecast or fire conditions forecast. So, you know, we really are thinking and praying for all those people on those front lines. But it will be when the fires are eventually out, and it will rain, and we mustn't forget what's happened. We must have the serious conversation about the future of our land management in Australia. And what I will say categorically is that this nonsense that we face every state political term, a state government is either marked up or marked down by some groups, not all groups, but some groups, on whether they're good environmental managers, whether they've created a big new national park or not. And without any care, it seems, about what the future management of that park's going to be. Where's its roads, its firefighting force, where's its water sources, how many trees, what thinning regime are you going to have? Are you going to have an aggressive winter burn-off regime to keep that park safe? And those sort of things just haven't been in our conversation nationally. So that's what I think we must get out of this whole season.
And keep discussing it, because those sorts of things and these ideas are easily forgotten. From the Australian Forest Products Association, Ross Hampton, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.